Welcome to this week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and this week we are talking about rowing a pair. I'm joined as ever by Marlene Royal.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our audience.
It's great to be back together again, but let's dive straight into the really exciting job of rowing a pair. Rowing a pair is my all-time favorite boat. I'm going to come right out there and say it. I know that makes me a minority, but I really like them. And as my husband never fails to remind me, I've gone through a lot of pairs partners over the years.
So have I.
So
I agree with you, because I rowed, when I started rowing sweep in high school, I also rowed a pair a lot. And it was absolutely my favorite boat.
Oh, well, I didn't know that about you. So there you go. There's a world first. Pairs are special. They are the equivalent of the single for sweep rowing. And because there's only two of you, and because everything one of you does affects the other one, they present a particular challenge. There's no other rowers to mute or damp down the effect of what you're doing in your technique, which obviously affects your partner. So today we're going to talk about the essentials of rowing a pair. We're going to talk about the key things that you really want to do when you start off, and some things that will help you to work out what works for you. Because one of the things about pairs is they have an element of uniqueness when you get to the finesse that is somewhat different from other boats. Now, this episode began because of this post that was on the Masters Rowing International, which says, any advice for two sweep rowers in their 40s trying a pair for their first time? I will put the link to the post in the show notes, because there's lots of good advice. There are lots of humorous quips and some very entertaining memories that pair rowers have shared about their experiences. Let's kick off. What are the essentials that you have to do from the very first time, or perhaps when you're getting into a new pair boat?
I think we want to make sure that the rig is set up correctly. And this is going to be even more critical for pairs, to make sure that your oarlock height is set correctly, to make sure that you have your foot stretchers set correctly so that your handle is in the right position, and so that you're releasing at the same angle when you take the oars out of the water. And, that's the initial place to start, because, you have to pay a lot of attention to what's happening on the recovery, and oar handle height is going to be really critical for your tap down and getting your weight over the hands at the release, as well as the angles. So we want to make sure that the angles and both athletes are reaching the finish position at the same time.
So simple recap: sit at the finish, blades squared and buried. Where does your handle come up your chest? You can't kind of check the parallels, because there's only one oar on each side. So one way to do to check that you're set up correctly is to set up for your rowing through the pin, so that you're each at the same place at the catch, with your front wheel or your hip bone relative to the pin, so that if you're level with the pin or 1 centimeter sternward of the pin, whatever it is, that you can both get to the exact same position. So that will be a good starting point. Hand the height of the handle is particularly important. And as I reckon with most small boats, I tend to favor being a little bit more symmetrical with the amount of work in front of the pin and behind the pin, just because it's a small boat. But that's a finesse that you can bring on when you've been rowing your boat for some time.
Yes, definitely. And you can mark your washboards so that each athlete has targets of where you want to make the catch angle and where you want to make the finish angle, and that might require a little bit of rigging in terms of inboards and outboards to make sure that each athlete can reach similar angles. And that's the beauty of the pair. You're looking for the combination of the result rather than each individual. You have to look at what the collective crew does to make sure that the boat's going to move symmetrically and row straight.
Yeah, start with identical rig. Make sure your blades are set appropriately. If you really are going into a pair for the first time, it may pay to have a slightly heavy rig. So instead of being on 371 and 117, you might change the outboard to being 115 with more. Sorry, I changed that the wrong way around, didn't I? No, 115 is a heavier load. It may pay to have a heavier load because then you can really feel what's happening when the blades are in the water. So that's a great starting point. Our next essential is who sits where. Marlene, why is there a difference here?
Well, there could be a difference if first I would say there could be a character difference, right? One person might be a much more capable stroke just in terms of leading the crew. The other thing to consider is who is going to steer and in what situations would the stroke steer or what situations might the bow seat steer. And I think you also have to look at the strength of the two different rowers, because if one person is not as strong as the other one, you may want to put them in a seat that has a little bit more leverage, which traditionally that's the bow seat. But again, this is going to depend on your rigging. So, you have to look at what, if you have strength differences between the two athletes, what is going to be the happy medium that's going to help the boat go straight. Because obviously if one person is pulling the other person around, that's not going to be very effective on the race course.
Yeah, best to start with, as Marlene says, the traditional setup. You can always refine it and adjust it later on. And I did have one pairs partner, Kate, hi, if you're out there, where we both rode both sides. We both sat in bow seat and stroke seat on both sides. So we had it bow steered me, bow steered her. And we never really came to a conclusion as to what made the boat go faster. The only thing we knew was that I was a better steersman than she was. But actually, as Marlene says, you can steer from bow, you can steer from stroke. It depends, what race course you're on. So it was very nice for us that we were able to be endlessly inventive. It's like, right, let's have a change, and we could do that. And we could do it reasonably quickly, that you could make the change and then the boat began to go quite quickly. There wasn't a lot of, messing around and relearning how to row on the other side.
But I think that's an important point. Is to experiment. You have to experiment a little bit with who strokes and who rows bow. And that's just going to depend on how you rig your boat. But and it also may change depending on the type of race you're doing and the course. If you're racing a head race that has a lot of steering and one athlete knows the course better than the other, then put whichever seat that person is sitting in, put them in the position to steer. If it's a buoyed course and it's straight, that might affect the lineup too. So I think you have to start simple in a traditional setup, but as you get more experience in the pair, refine it according to the race, because things are going to change.
Now, fast pairs are a particularly wonderful thing in rowing. There's nothing quite like it. Part of it is because you feel an incredible investment that you have made into this crew and making it work. Good communication between the two people is essential. One of my pairs partners, not Kate, used to say that I knew what she was thinking just by reading her back. I wasn't about it, and I could just tell. I just knew what she was thinking. And you do get that kind of bonded, I suppose. But let's run through what are the essential elements that make a pair or boat go fast.
Correct handle heights, and so that, again, you're releasing with the same differential in the handle height. You're carrying the balance, the high balance, with the same handle heights. What you do on the recovery is going to be really important for what then happens when the blade is placed in the water and then you start to drive. So really, working on the handle heights matching to keep the boat stable when the oars are out of the water is going to be quite critical.
One of the things that I was taught by Fred Smallbone with this regard was a little land drill that we did. He took one oar and he had one of us just sit and rest our hands on the handle, and he was holding the spoon just in a like a boat tie, so it was free standing, and one of us sat and we rocked forward and we pretended to take the stroke, to square the blade, to take the stroke, to tap down and just row. And the other sat next to us with their hands just on the shaft, just to feel what was going on. And then we swapped seats and we worked out that we had a somewhat different tap down. And so that gave us a little bit of insight into where we needed to change in order to meet in the middle. It wasn't that any one of us was right and the other was wrong, but that was a really useful exercise because you're on opposite sides, and the blades are angled down to water on your side. It's quite hard to guess, but by having us sit side by side in the gym, it was really quite a neat thing to do. So creating stability on the recovery is the second thing that I think really helps make a fast pair. Without stability on the recovery, you really can't work hard in the main part of the stroke. And so the best way to go about this is to start with those hand heights, make sure that you're doing the thing at the same time, and see what you can do to ensure that your blade work comes out clean, and work out where a wobble, if there is one, happens in the recovery and which side, they rock down to one way or the other. Timing absolutely everything together is really, really important in a pair because you need to be squaring together. You need to be straightening your arms at the same time. You need to be rocking your body forward at the same time, because even small variations in that can make a substantial difference to what's happening on the recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think between the pair, you have to work out what are your reference points. Like what is your reference point when you're going to start to square? What are your reference points where your upper body weight is, and being aware of what your upper body weight is? Because obviously if the individuals are starting to prepare the blade at different times, they also might be shifting their upper body weight at different times. So I think, they just have to have a really good common language as to what happens when. And I'm a big fan of physical reference points. Like if you need to put a piece of tape on the gunnel, or if you need to say, okay, as soon as our knees break, we do this, or as soon as we feel the weight on our hands, we do this. Whatever it is, I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities here, and it also relates to, how does the crew think about things? Do they feel things more? Are they much more technical in terms of they want a physical reference point, or is feeling enough for them, or do they have good body awareness, and if not, how can the coach help them get body awareness? So this all goes into the communication level, that the pair has to work some of these things out on land as well, and bring that into the boat, so that we have two minds who at least know, okay, even if things go a little awry, we're going to get to our next reference point, and we can collect it again, and then we're going to get to our next reference point. And I call it Weight Watchers. So you've got to watch your upper body weight all the time. You've got to know where that weight is, because in a pair, if your upper body weight is starting to get thrown off the keel, or one athlete's overreaching and another one isn't, that's going to affect your stability a tremendous amount.
One of the things that I think is important in a pair is to know what the strengths and existing skills of the two people are. It really is important that your stroke is absolutely consistent. They need to be like a little metronome and do exactly the same thing every stroke. I agree with Steve Lawson that you can let bow be the person that makes small adjustments that changes the balance. Then there is only one person making adjustments, because one of the challenges, if you both make an adjustment, you tend to overcorrect and not have the desired outcome. So that is my preference, but it isn't the only way to do it. After you've been working on getting stability on the recovery, Marlene, you have a particular thing that you think is useful in terms of teaching each other how to get to the same place at the same time.
Well, I think you have to decide that as a crew. Like, you have to decide, is your gathering point the tap down when you feel the weight over your hands, or is your gathering point arms and body away? So generally in small boats, or if I'm rigging a crew, I'll usually start with getting them set at the finished position, so that the angles when they release the blades are symmetrical. And then I'll work at getting them out to arms and body over. And just, when it's a new crew, I'll try to get that timing in sync, and then move from there. Because obviously, the angle that you put the blade in the water is really important, and approaching the compression is important. But if they can't get the release and carry that momentum out to the arms and body away, they're going to have a very difficult time matching, the rest of the compression. So, what your gathering point is, I think that might vary a little bit depending on the coach. Some coaches like the gathering at the release. Some coach like the gathering at the arms and body away. Some like it when the weight comes on the feet. I think it depends a little bit on what your crew relates to, but you have to determine some reference points so that in a boat that's as sensitive as the pair, the momentum on the recovery is going to be very important in your speed overall. So maximizing how you carry that momentum deeper into the recovery, I think, is really important.
That's a really useful point, and definitely something that it's worth experimenting with. Now, the next thing that fast pairs have is matched power curves. Both athletes are able to deliver power in a very similar way, not perhaps identical, but in a very, very similar way. So if you're a leg drive first and then body swing, and your partner is a little bit of body and legs together simultaneously at the catch, you're going to find it hard to make your pair match, because it's important that the amount of time it takes you to go from full compression to release needs to be identical. That's the first thing. You can have a pair that can do that identically but does it in a slightly different way. But ideally, you're both on the leg drive, you both initiate the power in a similar way. you swing your backs together, and you finish your arms together. So matching your power curves is a really critical part.
And that's something that you can work on land. I think that's an important tool if you're using an ergometer that will give you a power curve. Look at the power curve and try to be similar to each other. And obviously, there can still be slight idiosyncrasies, and a boat can still move quite well, but it can't be too crazy. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, especially the amount of time that the blade's in the water. That really has to be the same.
One of the things that goes wrong in a pair when you can't match your power curve is you don't go straight. So steering is another thing that is really helpful to practice. And the better you can be at aligning your skill in the power, the more likely it is that you will also then be successful in going straight. This is why really skillful pairs sometimes don't use a rudder. The answer is because they don't need to. But when you're starting, it's useful for one person to be in charge of steering and to do that steering as little as possible. Try not to use the rudder. My general advice is to try and steer with pressure more than steering with the rudder. And if you're the bow person, you can steer with pressure by putting your blade in earlier or later than your partner, or alternatively, putting it in at the same time and making the pressure you put on come on earlier or later. So you can be a little bit more aggressive on the catch, and you'll find you can very quickly make very small steering adjustments to either side just using pressure.
And I would suggest spending a lot of time on perfecting your steering, especially if you're planning to race.
Yeah, I suppose time in the boat does give you that perfection, I suppose. The fact is that any rowboat can go off course. And so what you really need to do is not really be skilled at steering, but be skilled at recovering from when you go off course. Because, it can be caused by a wind gust or a duck or hitting a buoy or whatever. So the ability to not oversteer is a really worthwhile skill to acquire.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And also, for example, if you're on the race course and you say you have a focus 10 that's going to come up in your race plan, you may want to build in 1 or 2 strokes to check your steering, make any tiny corrections that you might need to make before you do a real focus 10 or a power 10, because you don't want to go into a power 10 or a move and be off course. So that might be a good thing. That's a good thing to build into your practices all the time, especially when you're doing race pieces or practice pieces. Make it a habit to check your steering for 1 or 2 strokes before you move into that piece to make sure that you're on course. And, that helps the pair learn how to make these quick adjustments.
Yeah. Pairs are absolutely fantastic boats. They sometimes take a lot of work. It is rewarding, but generally speaking, the reason a pair can be so great is that if you have 2 good pairs, you've then instantly got a 4. It is the I suppose the ground base work that so many good bigger boats are built off of.
Yes, you can go from a pair into the 4, but it's not so easy to go from the 4 into the pair.
Exactly. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of rowing coaches forget and a lot of athletes don't realize, is that you learn in big boats because they're more stable. Then you progress into the smaller boats. But the point about the smaller boats is it allows you to build back into the bigger boats, and you will have a much faster 4 and 8 if you've got people who can row pairs successfully. Just like a quad made up of the 4 fastest scullers isn't necessarily the fastest quad, but you won't be struggling with a lot of balance issues because everybody hopefully knows how to balance a single. And in fact, that's a very good indication. If you can balance a single, you can in all likelihood move into the pairs, as long as you can handle the blade work differences between sweep and sculling, which is a subject for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say if you're going to row a pair competitively and seriously, also consider spending some time in the singles and then going back into the pair, and then a little bit of time, maybe it's just technical time, but time in a single is also going to help build a stronger pair.
There's a nice thing. And actually being competitive with your pairs partner is a lot of fun, because it is the two of you kind of battling it out, maybe on the erg, maybe in the singles. And then when you come together, you both benefit from the fact that the two of you know how to battle against each other. Then you know how to battle together. Any final thoughts?
I think it sounds like a lot of fun.
I think Marlene needs to spend more time in the pair.
I know.
We're part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.